The scoreboard read 199. She had needed 200. The woman standing at the Family Feud podium on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in March 2024 was named Paulette Graves. She was 46 years old. She had driven 7 hours from Little Rock, Arkansas, with 4 family members in a car she had borrowed from her church pastor because her own car had been declared unsafe to drive 3 months earlier, and she had not yet saved enough to replace it. She had prepared for 12 weeks. She had studied survey patterns with the systematic focus of a woman who understands, from long experience, that preparation is the only form of luck she can control. She had done everything right. And she was 1 point short of the $20,000 that would have changed the shape of her family's life. Her partner in Fast Money, her younger sister Tonya, had scored 106 points in the first half of the round. Paulette needed 94 to win. She had answered all 5 questions. 4 had landed on the board. Her total 93, 1 point. The studio audience absorbed the corrected number in silence. Paulette absorbed it standing, which was the more remarkable of the 2 responses, given what she had come here carrying. Steve Harvey looked at the scoreboard. He looked at Paulette. He looked at the scoreboard again, as though confirming something he already knew, and then he did something that no one in that studio predicted, something that made a woman who had been standing through everything simply stop being able to stand. He walked to her. He took both her hands in his. And then Steve Harvey, who has narrated thousands of moments on this stage with the fluency of a man born for live television, spoke to Paulette Graves in a voice so quiet that the microphones barely caught it and the 200 people in that room held their breath to hear. What he said made her collapse. Not in grief. In something larger than grief. In the specific, overwhelming release of a woman who has been strong for so long that being met with genuine care feels, at first, indistinguishable from losing the ground beneath her feet. Paulette Graves had been raising her 2 daughters alone since 2017, when her husband Marcus had died of a sudden cardiac event at the age of 39, leaving behind a wife, a 9-year-old named Destiny, a 6-year-old named Jayla, and a mortgage that was 3 months behind the moment the single income it had been designed for ceased to exist. She had not collapsed then. She had wanted to. She had sat in the parking lot of the hospital for 45 minutes after they told her, in the front seat of their car with her hands on the steering wheel, and she had decided, in the specific way that decisions are made when the alternative is genuinely unbearable, that she was not going to fall apart. Not because falling apart was wrong. Because Destiny and Jayla were at her mother's house, and they were going to need her to be the person who drove them home. And that was the next thing, and she was going to do the next thing. And after that there would be another next thing, and she was going to do that one too. 7 years of next things had followed. Paulette worked as a licensed practical nurse at a long-term care facility in Little Rock. It was demanding work that required her to be on her feet for 10-hour shifts, managing the needs of elderly residents with the combination of clinical competence and genuine warmth that the work required, and that Paulette brought to it not because her training had produced it, though her training had helped, but because she was constitutionally incapable of being in the presence of someone who needed care and not providing it. This quality had made her an excellent nurse. It had also, in the years following Marcus's death, made it extremely difficult for her to accept care from others, because giving and receiving occupied such different positions in her understanding of herself that the second had never felt entirely natural. She had sold the house in 2018 after it became clear that the mortgage was not something she could sustain on her income alone. She had moved herself and the girls into a 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was safe without being comfortable, the specific category of neighborhood that a single parent on a nursing salary could afford and that required constant vigilance about which corners of it the girls should and should not be on. She had maintained the vigilance. She had also maintained the household in the way she maintained everything, with discipline, with attention to detail, and with the quiet determination of a woman who has decided that the circumstances of her life are not going to determine its character. Destiny, now 16, was an honor student at her high school who had been identified by her school counselor as a strong candidate for competitive college scholarships. The counselor had been encouraging, specific, and honest. With the right preparation and the right applications, Destiny could reasonably expect significant financial support. The preparation cost money, application fees, test prep materials, the occasional college visit to schools within driving distance. These were the specific, accumulating costs of a path that was theoretically available to a family in Paulette's circumstances, and that was in practice a great deal harder to access than its availability suggested. Jayla was 13 and had recently been diagnosed with scoliosis that her pediatric orthopedist had recommended monitoring with annual imaging and, depending on progression, possible intervention. The monitoring cost money. The possible intervention cost considerably more money, and the timeline on which that conversation would need to happen was not a timeline Paulette could control. The $20,000 from a Family Feud win would not have solved everything. Paulette was too precise a thinker to confuse one thing solving everything with one thing solving some things. But it would have addressed Destiny's college preparation costs. It would have covered Jayla's next 2 years of monitoring and established a reserve for the intervention conversation if it came. It would have replaced the car. It would have provided, for the first time in 7 years, something she had not had: margin, not comfort. Just the knowledge that the next unexpected thing that arrived would not immediately constitute a crisis. The Family Feud application had been submitted by her sister Tonya in November, who had argued that they should at least try, and who had done the submitting before Paulette could present the case against it. Paulette's case against it had been, in Tonya's characterization, entirely predictable: that it was a long shot, that the travel would cost money they did not have, and that she did not want to raise the girls' hopes about something that might not happen. Tonya had submitted the application anyway, and had told Paulette about it after the confirmation arrived, because Tonya had spent 43 years as Paulette's sister and understood that asking for permission was a reliable method of receiving a no. Paulette had been quiet for a long time when Tonya told her. Then she had said, 12 weeks. We have 12 weeks. We are going to be ready. They had been ready. Paulette, Tonya, their cousin Reginald, their Aunt Shirley, and their Uncle Curtis had prepared with the focused seriousness of people for whom the prize money was not hypothetical. They had studied. They had practiced. They had quizzed each other in the kitchen and in the car and over the phone on weekday evenings when Paulette was home from her shift and the girls were in bed and there was a quiet hour available that she had historically used to lie on the couch and stare at the ceiling and do the arithmetic of the month. She had used those hours differently for 12 weeks. She had used them to prepare. The pastor had lent her the car without being asked. He had heard about the taping through the church network, because small communities do not keep things secret for long, and he had appeared at Paulette's door on the Thursday before the trip and handed her the keys to his Chevrolet Tahoe and told her to bring it back in one piece. She had thanked him with the composed gratitude of a woman who was learning, slowly and against her nature, that accepting help was not the same as admitting defeat. She had packed sandwiches for the drive. 7 hours was a long way, and the family had not budgeted for restaurants. The family they played against in the main game was the Fontaine family from Memphis, a warm, competitive group organized around a patriarch named Gerald, who had the assured energy of a man who had been the funniest person in every room he had ever entered, and who had decided that a television studio was not going to be an exception. The Fontaines were enjoyable opponents, and the main game between the two families was genuinely fun, which was not something Paulette had expected to be able to say about an experience whose stakes, for her, had nothing to do with fun. She played with the methodical focus of someone for whom 12 weeks of preparation had produced not a strategy but a disposition, a state of complete attention that did not require her to calculate each answer, but simply to be present enough that the right answer arrived without obstruction. She had drilled the patterns long enough that the patterns were part of her now, the way a medication protocol becomes part of a nurse after enough repetitions, not thought about but simply done, cleanly and without hesitation. The Graves family won the main game by 17 points. Paulette received this with a nod that those who knew her would have recognized as the equivalent of considerable satisfaction. Fast money was structured with Tonya going first and Paulette closing. Tonya, who had prepared alongside her sister for 12 weeks, and who had, by the family's collective assessment, the sharpest instinct for common survey answers of any of them, was the correct choice for the first position. She had the specific quality of mind that anticipated what ordinary people said rather than what they should say, which was a distinction that mattered significantly in this format. Tonya's 20 seconds began. Name something a person does when they wake up before their alarm. Tonya said, try to go back to sleep. Number 1 answer 4 points. Name something you always find at a birthday party. Tonya said, cake. Number 1 answer 1 points. Name a reason someone might call in sick when they are not. Tonya said, a mental health day. Number 3 answer 17 points. Name something people do on Sunday mornings. Tonya said, go to church. Number 2 answer 1 points. Name something that gets better with age. Tonya said, wine. She had hesitated for a fraction of a second before saying it, because Paulette did not drink and the question had seemed, in the half-second of the hesitation, like a question whose most common answer might conflict with something. The hesitation cost her. The board revealed wine as number 4, not the top answer, but on the board. 12 points. Tonya's total 155 points. The audience applauded. It was a strong score. Paulette needed 45 points. 45 points across 5 answers, none of which could repeat Tonya's, was achievable. The room carried the specific optimism of a situation that is going well and that has every visible reason to continue going well. Paulette stepped to the podium. She had been standing off to the side, watching Tonya's round with the focused attention of a competitor rather than a spectator. She had been tracking which answers were used and organizing the alternative options with the efficiency of a mind trained to manage complex information under time pressure. She was ready in the specific way that 12 weeks of preparation and 7 hours in a borrowed car and 10-hour nursing shifts and 17 years of doing the next thing had made her ready, not because the moment was comfortable, but because she was not capable of being anything other than prepared when something mattered. Her 20 seconds began. Name something a person does when they wake up before their alarm. She could not say try to go back to sleep. She said, check their phone. Number 2 answer 29 points. Name something you always find at a birthday party. She could not say cake. She said decorations. Number 3 answer 19 points. Name a reason someone might call in sick when they are not. She could not say mental health day. She said, they need a break. The board did not reveal it. 0 points. The audience made the sympathetic sound of 200 people who are on someone's side and cannot help them. Name something people do on Sunday mornings. She could not say go to church. She said, sleep in. Number 1 answer, 41 points. She had cleared 45. They had won. The audience began to respond. Name something that gets better with age. She could not say wine. She said, cheese. Number 5 answer 4 points. The buzzer sounded. Paulette's total 93 points. Combined total 248 points. They had won. The studio erupted. The Graves family embraced. Tonya was crying. Reginald lifted his arms. Aunt Shirley and Uncle Curtis were on their feet. Paulette stood at the podium and did not move. She had heard the number. She had done the arithmetic. 248 was greater than 200. They had won the $20,000. She understood this. What she had not expected was what she felt when she understood it. What she felt was not joy, not first. What she felt first was the specific, sudden loosening of something that had been held tightly for 7 years without her fully understanding how tightly it was being held, and the loosening arrived all at once, without warning, and she was not prepared for it. She was prepared for everything. She was not prepared for relief. Steve Harvey had been watching her since the buzzer sounded. He had watched the family celebrate, and he had watched Paulette stand motionless at the podium, and he had understood. in the way that 16 seasons of watching people under pressure had taught him to understand that what was happening for her was not the same thing as what was happening for everyone else in the room. He crossed to her. He did not celebrate with the family first. He went directly to her, which the production team would later describe as the fastest he had ever moved to a contestant without a visible prompt. He took both her hands in his. He spoke quietly enough that the cameras barely caught it. And Paulette Graves, who had not collapsed in a hospital parking lot in 2017 and had not collapsed in the 7 years of next things that followed, collapsed. What Steve Harvey said to Paulette Graves, in the moment before she collapsed, was pieced together afterward from the studio microphones and from the accounts of those who were close enough to hear it. He said 7 words. "You do not have to hold any more." He had not known, precisely, what he was responding to when he said them. He had not been briefed on the full details of Paulette's situation before this moment. The production team's pre-show notes had provided an outline, but the specific shape of 7 years of single parenthood and what it had required of her was not something that could be fully conveyed in a pre-show briefing. What he had known was what he could see, a woman who had been completely controlled throughout a main game and a fast money round, and had then stood completely still while the people around her celebrated, and who was holding herself with the specific posture of someone whose grip on themselves was the thing they could not afford to release. The 7 words were not calculated. They were the accurate response to what he saw. Paulette's legs stayed under her. That was not the collapse. The collapse was the sound that came out of her when the 7 words landed, a sound that was not a sob and was not a word, and that those present described afterward, in terms that all agreed were inadequate, but that converged on the same basic description. It was the sound of someone putting down something very heavy that they had been carrying for a very long time. Tonya was across the stage in seconds. She put her arms around her sister, and Paulette leaned into her with the completeness of someone who has finally arrived somewhere safe. Steve Harvey stood back. He had done the thing the moment required, and the moment now required him to give it space rather than fill it. The studio audience was silent in the way it had learned to be silent when something genuine was happening, not the polite silence of a room, waiting for what comes next, but the attentive silence of people who understand they are witnessing something that belongs to the person it is happening to, and that their function is to hold still and not diminish it. When Paulette had steadied herself, when the sound had run its course, and she had returned to something approaching the surface of the room, Steve came back. "Tell me," he said simply. She told him. She told him about Marcus and 2017 and the hospital parking lot and the decision she had made in the front seat of their car. She told him about Destiny and the scholarship applications and Jayla and the scoliosis monitoring and the conversation with the orthopedist that she was holding space for without knowing what it would cost. She told him about the car that had been declared unsafe and the pastor's Tahoe parked in the studio lot. She told him about 12 weeks of preparation, about the girls asking her what she was studying every evening, about Destiny staying up late on the nights before their video call practice sessions so she could quiz her mother on survey categories that she had memorized from watching old episodes on her phone. "Destiny helped you prepare," Steve said. "Every week," Paulette said. "She made flash cards. She is 16 and she made her mother flash cards." The room received this with the warmth that the detail deserved. "What does Destiny want to be?" Steve asked. Paulette looked at him with the expression of a mother who has been asked a question she has thought about so often and with such concentrated hope that the thinking has become a form of prayer. "A doctor," she said. "She has wanted to be a doctor since she was 7 years old. She has not changed her mind once in 9 years. She does not change her mind about things that matter. She gets that from somewhere," Steve said. Paulette said nothing. She did not need to. Steve Harvey turned to the audience. "I want to say something about what I have just heard," he said. His voice had the register he used when he was not performing but speaking. "This woman drove 7 hours in a borrowed car with sandwiches she made the night before because she could not afford to stop at a restaurant on the way. She has been working 10-hour shifts for 7 years. She has been raising 2 daughters without a partner. She has been doing the math on her family's future every single month, in the hours after her girls go to sleep, with enough discipline and enough love and enough faith that her 16-year-old is making flashcards to help her mother win a game show. He paused. That is not a hard luck story. That is a portrait of what it looks like when someone refuses, every single day, to be defeated by circumstances they did not choose. He reached into his jacket. The Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation invests in families like this one, not because they need pity, because they need a chance to let the preparation meet the opportunity, and sometimes the opportunity needs a little help getting to the right size. He produced an envelope. This is a check for $25,000 from the foundation. Combined with your $20,000 from the show, that is $45,000. I want Destiny to apply to every school she is qualified for. I want Jayla's medical needs to be addressed without a spreadsheet attached to every decision. I want Paulette Graves to buy a car that is safe to drive. He held the envelope toward her. And I want you, he said, to sleep through one night without doing the math. Just one. You've earned it. Paulette Graves took the envelope. She held it in both hands. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked up at Steve Harvey and said the thing that had been true for 7 years and that she had never said to anyone because there had never been anyone in the room who had created enough space for it. I am so tired, she said. She said it without apology, without drama, with the complete, plain honesty of a woman who has finally arrived somewhere it is safe to say the true thing. Steve Harvey held her gaze. I know, he said. Rest now. Tonya, behind her, pulled her close again. The Graves family converged, and the studio, which had been quiet, found the response the moment deserved, not the explosive energy of a game show celebration, but the sustained, warm, genuine applause of 200 people who have been given something real and are expressing their recognition of it clearly. The episode aired 5 weeks after the taping. The production team made the editorial decision they had made in every extraordinary moment this season. They preserved the full sequence without compression. From Steve Harvey taking Paulette's hands through her 7 words to him at the end, the sequence ran for 16 minutes and 22 seconds. The network approved it without revision. The response was the most sustained the production office had processed in the show's recent history. What distinguished it from the responses to previous moments was its specificity. People were not writing about the reunion or the reunion of separated family members or the recovery of a lost friendship. They were writing about 7 words. You do not have to hold any more. They were writing about what it felt like to hear those words in a context that was not their own and to experience them anyway, in the specific, localized way that accurate language lands when it names something you have been experiencing without a name for it. Single parents wrote about it. Caregivers wrote about it. People who had been strong for a long time in circumstances that did not permit them to be anything else wrote about it. The specific quality of what Paulette had said, I am so tired, spoken without apology, in the voice of someone who had finally arrived somewhere safe, was quoted repeatedly as the thing that had mattered most. Not the money, not the score, the permission to say the true thing in a room where the true thing was welcome. A nurse practitioner in Atlanta wrote a long post about the episode that was shared more than 200,000 times. She wrote about the specific exhaustion of healthcare workers who also happen to be single parents, about the way those 2 roles compound each other's demands, without anyone in either context fully understanding the weight of the other, and about what it meant to watch a woman, who clearly operated in both contexts, be given, for the first time in 7 years, the space to be something other than capable. She wrote that she had watched the clip 3 times before she could finish it, and that she had shown it to her charge nurse the following morning. She did not know Paulette Graves. She felt, she wrote, as though she did. The $45,000 was deployed with the precision that characterized everything Paulette did. The car was the first purchase, because the car was the most immediately practical gap, and practical gaps were the category Paulette addressed first. She bought a 2019 Honda Pilot with 82,000 miles and a clean inspection report, and she returned the pastor's Tahoe on a Saturday morning with a card and a batch of her grandmother's sweet potato muffins, which the pastor received with the composed pleasure of a man who had not expected to be repaid in muffins, and who found that muffins were an entirely adequate form of repayment. Destiny's college application process was funded in full. The test preparation materials, the application fees for 11 schools, and 2 college visits to campuses within a reasonable driving distance that had financial aid packages worth examining in person. Destiny approached the application process with the same methodical seriousness she had brought to making her mother's flashcards, which Paulette observed with a pride she could not have fully articulated, but that was visible to anyone who watched them in the same room. Destiny was accepted to 6 of the 11 schools. She chose a state university with a strong pre-medicine program and a scholarship package that, combined with the financial aid her family qualified for and the reserve Paulette had been able to establish from the remaining funds, made the first 2 years manageable and the subsequent 2 years a problem she had a plan for. This was, in Paulette's vocabulary, not a solved problem but a solvable one, which was an entirely different and considerably more livable category. Jayla's annual imaging was scheduled and conducted without the specific background anxiety that had previously accompanied every medical appointment, the arithmetic of what the appointment might reveal and what the revelation might cost running simultaneously with the appointment itself. The imaging showed mild progression that the orthopedist recommended monitoring for another year before any intervention decision was made. Paulette received this assessment with the equanimity of a nurse who understands the clinical language of watchful waiting, and with the additional equanimity of a woman who now had a reserve against the conversation that watchful waiting might eventually produce. Steve Harvey followed up with the Graves family through his production team 6 weeks after the episode aired. He had asked to be kept informed in the manner he had established across the extraordinary moments this season. When the team relayed the update, the car, the applications, Destiny's acceptances, Jayla's imaging, he received it in the way he received these updates, quietly, with the satisfaction of a man who does not require his contributions to be dramatic to find them meaningful. He sent Paulette a card. It said one thing: "Hope the math is easier this month." Paulette kept the card on the kitchen windowsill, next to the spot where the girls had always left their backpacks, because it was the first place she looked every morning when she came downstairs, and she wanted the first thing she saw to be a reminder that the math had changed. It had changed, not because her circumstances had become easy. They had not. She was still a single parent on a nursing salary managing 2 daughters' futures with the careful, patient discipline of someone who could not afford to be careless. But the margin existed now, and the margin made everything that had previously required perfect execution merely require good execution, and good execution was something she had been doing her whole life. She slept through a night in April, the first full night in longer than she could accurately remember, and she woke up and lay still for a moment in the specific quiet of a morning that did not immediately require anything of her, and she thought about the 7 words, and she decided that she was going to try to hold things a little more loosely from now on. Not because holding tightly had been wrong. It had been necessary. But necessary had passed, and she was going to let the passing be real. Destiny left for university in August. Paulette drove her in the Honda Pilot, with Jayla in the back seat and Tonya riding along, because no one had suggested she should not, and she had not waited to be invited. They arrived 2 hours before the dormitory check-in window opened and spent those 2 hours in a parking lot eating sandwiches that Paulette had made the night before, because some habits were right, and not everything that had been necessary needed to become unnecessary just because circumstances had improved. When Destiny walked into her dormitory for the first time, she turned back once at the door and looked at her mother. Paulette nodded. It was the same nod she had given when the Graves family won the main game by 17 points, the equivalent, for a woman of her register, of considerable satisfaction and considerable love in equal measure. Destiny understood it exactly, because she had grown up learning to read it. She went in. Paulette stood in the parking lot with Tonya and Jayla, and did not cry, which was the correct response. She had done her crying on a game show stage in March. She was done with that now. What was left was the ongoing, ordinary, irreplaceable work of watching her daughters become themselves, which she intended to do with the same attention and the same patience, and the same refusal to be defeated by circumstances she did not choose that she had been bringing to every next thing for 7 years. She was not tired anymore. Or rather, she was tired in the ordinary way of a woman who works long shifts and raises children and drives 2 hours to stand in a university parking lot eating sandwiches. That kind of tired was fine. That kind of tired was simply a Tuesday, and she had been doing Tuesdays her whole life, and she was good at them. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with a mother who needs to hear that the holding does not have to last forever, and if you know one, tell her today.